for that update. And joining us now here at the table, we have Miriam. She's a foreign editor with BuzzFeed who spent time covering Russia. Tommy Vietor, he's the co-founder of the political consulting firm Fenway Strategies. He was a former spokesman at the National Security Council under President Obama. Elise Jordan also worked at the NSC as director of communications there under President George W. Bush. She's now a contributor to the Daily Beast. And Hayes Brown, a reporter covering national security issues for Think Progress. Thanks for joining us. And Miriam, I'll start with you, since you know Russia so well. Maybe you could just sort of give us some context and some background about what exactly is going on here. You know, the Crimea was sort of transferred, I guess, to the Ukraine in 1954 by then the Soviet Union. There are a lot of Russian-speaking people who live there. There are also a lot of Russian-speaking people who identify more, I think, with Russia in the eastern part of Ukraine. Are we seeing a strategy here by Vladimir Putin to just expand the territory of Russia to include these sort of predominantly Russian-speaking areas? Is that what's going on?
I think that's what's going on. I mean, we see what's happening in Crimea right now, and as you said at the top, the most important thing to watch is what's going to happen in the east of Ukraine. I kind of don't really think he's going to stop at Crimea. Putin has this like imperial project. One of the biggest tragedies of the 21st century, that he said, was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and what he's trying to do is kind of rebuild Russia's imperial. So he's relying on this very sort of native idea of what it means to be Russian. So he draws on ethnic ties, he draws on religious ties, and he sort of sees anybody in Russia's sphere as anybody who has this super Orthodox and Russian identification.
Well, and that's the other interesting thing too, because I think it's a relic of the Stalin era that all these people were moved from Russia, maybe against their will, to parts of the Soviet Empire, and large Russian-speaking communities sort of loyal to Moscow sprouted up, and now that is sort of becoming the pretense in part for Putin trying to expand the territory, because this declaration he got from Parliament yesterday, it didn't just say Crimea. It basically gave him carte blanche for all of Ukraine.
Yeah, precisely, and that's why there's a lot of fears going around the region. You have these sort of communities in Kazakhstan, you have these kind of communities in Latvia, you have these these Russian-speaking communities all over the former Soviet Union, precisely because everybody was just kind of moved all over the place. So if he's allowed to do this, the question then becomes, what's next? Well,
so Tommy, what about the Prime Minister of Ukraine, the current, interim, whatever you want to call him, Prime Minister of Ukraine, called this a declaration of war. Right. Clearly, there are Russian troops on the scene. As far as I know, Ukraine does not have the military might to fight back a full-fledged, Russian incursion. Is there any scenario under which there's a military conflict here, or can Russia really basically just take what it wants because nobody wants a military conflict with them?
I can't see any scenario where there's a military conflict that involves U.S. forces. I think what we're seeing here is Putin lashing out militarily in response to a massive political defeat. He lost a very close ally in Yanukovych when he was essentially deposed and sent from Kiev, and now he's sending troops in. I think we need to reject, the United States needs to reject his sort of zero-sum look at this, that Ukraine must either choose to be Russian or choose Western. This is a sovereign nation. They should be able to live how they please and have their sovereignty respected. He obviously broke that. I think the readout you read out earlier was remarkable. I've worked on a lot of these during my time at the White House, and generally it was trying to figure out ways to say nothing with different words. They talked about issues of mutual concern, whatever. This was direct. This was in Putin's face, and letting him know that there will be diplomatic consequences, like not going to the G8 meeting, maybe kicking them out of the G8, maybe sanctions, maybe breaking off trade talks. So, there's very little you can do here militarily. Frankly, I don't think it's in the U.S. interest to start a war with Russia, but there will be an international response that I don't know will be effective in the long run, but will be isolating for Russia.
Well, yeah, what does that mean, Elise, do you think, to somebody like Putin? Okay, we're not going to participate in the preparatory meetings for the G8. Maybe there won't even be a G8 this year. Does that mean anything to Putin?
I think it's a slap on the wrist. I think the problem is that Putin has no fear right now, because he's seen Obama and how Obama handled Syria and the red line, and I think he's incredibly empowered. And unfortunately, I think this shows a lack of foresight in the Obama foreign policy that has unfortunately, been more of the rule. You look at how Ambassador Nuland and the ambassador to the Ukraine are talking about power sharing arrangements. It gets leaked on YouTube, but there's no plan for what happens next. So this happens, and you think Putin isn't going to respond. Like, what is our response?
I guess what I wonder, and Hayes, I think back to 2008 and the situation in Georgia, and George W. Bush was president. The United States was outraged at this incursion. Ultimately, it wasn't something the United States was willing to put any troops on the ground to stop, and ultimately, Putin just sort of got his way, and life went on. I wonder, is there more that the United States can do here?
I mean, not in terms of military response, like Tommy said. I mean, even in the time of George W. Bush, when we had a much larger defense budget, we couldn't do anything to stop Russia when it invaded Georgia. So I don't think there's much in terms of that we can do. We did have, like you mentioned, the $40 billion worth of trade with Russia last year, and they want more. Even as late as last December, they were trying to negotiate to have not quite a free trade deal, but a much bigger economic tie to the United States. So if we cut off those talks, if we try to, as far as we can within the WTO, lower our trade with Russia, that would send a pretty strong message. But as far as immediate actions,
are we going to go, though? Are we going to turn Russia into an international pariah? Are we going to cut off visas for all the parliamentarians who voted for this incursion? Like, what really are these harsh measures? Because I don't think that, not going to Sochi G8, no one even wants to go there anyway after the Olympics.
We've been there, we've seen that the hotels aren't ready. But you mentioned possibly taking away visas from the parliamentarians. That is an option on the table. I mean, or even as far as putting a travel ban on Putin traveling outside of Russia. If the U.S. really wants to send a strong message,
which would be great.
Which would be great. If we could round up our allies in Europe to do the same thing, that'd be amazing.
Well, there are some reasons maybe why our allies in Europe would hesitate to take a step like that. We can get into that after this. We'll talk more about what could or should be done given what's going on in Ukraine right now.